Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to VUX World, the Practical Voice Podcast. Today's guest is Claire Mitchell from VaynerMedia. We get into a deep discussion about conversation design, situation design and sound design. It's a big design talk this week. We do get into some really good details of situational design. I know that the topic's been covered here and there and it's been kind of discussed on one or two podcasts, and I've seen a few articles about it, but this was a real good opportunity to get really into detail about what it actually is, what it actually means, and how you actually do it, and the value of it, which is a fantastic conversation. We also discussed sound design. I'm so glad that there is someone else out there who is banging the drum for sound design that is not a sound designer. We've had loads of sound designers on the podcast, and we're all banging the drum to kind of evangelize for the use of sound design in voice experiences. So it's nice to see Claire banging that drum as well. And we get into some examples of where sound design can be used, where it is being used, and some examples of applications that are using it well as well. Shout out to ReadSpeaker for sponsoring this episode and all the episodes of VUX World throughout February. If you're looking for a custom text-to-speech voice, then ReadSpeaker are the place to go for that. They've been doing this for 20 odd years. They brought text-to-speech to the browser for the very first time over 20 years ago. There is very, very few companies more experienced than ReadSpeaker. They make text-to-speech, customized text-to-speech applications for brands all over the world. You know, some of the world's biggest brands as well, and you can use this stuff wherever you need it. It doesn't have to be in a voice application, although you can use it in a voice application, but you can also use it in your IVR systems and phone lines, on your websites, in public announcement systems, and wherever you need a voice, a customized voice, a branded voice. Check out ReadSpeaker because they have what you need. It's readspeaker.com. The link is in the show notes and it's also on the website if you're listening online. Thank you, ReadSpeaker, for sponsoring VUX World. Now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, this is Claire Mitchell of VaynerMedia on VUX World.
VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. Branding with the big faces.
I love listening to it.
Kane Sims.
Kane Sims, the one and only.
Britain's finest, Mr. Kane Sims.
Dustin Coates.
I like it when you guys are together and talking about voice.
Without further ado, welcome to the show.
We have a great show. We've got Claire Mitchell from VaynerMedia. Welcome, Claire.
Hi there. Great to be here.
Cool. And then, so Claire, you're at VaynerMedia. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you do and what VaynerMedia is doing in voice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm director on our VaynerSmart team at VaynerMedia, which is our emerging technologies group. VaynerMedia itself is a full-service media advertising production company, and our team is sort of tasked with looking at new platforms for storytelling, communication, and really interactivity between brands and an audience.
And you were mentioning that you actually came into voice from a background in IoT, is that right?
Yeah, I actually have a very windy path. Studied philosophy, so I always joke around that I'm lucky to be employed. But started my career in creative development for a visual effects studio. So 3D integrated into live action, really photoreal stuff. And after about 4 years of that, went back to grad school for interaction design and studied human-computer interaction, a little bit of programming. And out of that, ended up working for an engineering studio and then an IoT software platform for industrial applications. And my role there was lead product designer, so designing the interface for building these IoT applications. But I also built a ton of prototypes and made videos, instructional videos, to show our users how to use the software. So then that ultimately led me to VaynerMedia. I met Patrick Gibbons, who leads our group, and was really excited about what he was building here. So now I get to work with our creative teams, not only designing and building for voice, but really creating prototypes that illustrate any concepts that folks might have.
So is there a distinction at VaynerMedia between those different elements, or is it kind of like one division, if you like, that handles all of these emerging technology projects?
Well, the VaynerSmart group is focused on emerging technology, but we really work pretty integrated with all of our teams here. Anyone who's got appetite for innovation, we get to sort of partner up with and form these little interdisciplinary groups from project to project.
What was it about? Were you intending to kind of go into the voice space? Was that one of the things, or is that something that you just happen to have come into given the role that you're in currently?
Well, it's interesting. I guess in grad school, a big focus was new user interfaces. And so voice itself wasn't as important to me as just all of the different inputs that you could possibly use from voice to gesture to, obviously physical objects that could be turned into capacitive sensors. So that led me into the IoT space where I was dealing a lot with bringing the digital and the physical together. And so voice has been a natural extension of that work. But even now, I don't think of my job as focused on voice as much as interactive experiences that deal with a lot of different inputs.
And you mentioned that within VaynerMedia, you're focused on storytelling, interactive experiences. What are some of the projects that you've worked on, some of the things that you've built? A lot of voice stuff, obviously, which is a huge focus for our team and for the company as a whole, because it's such an amazing channel and gaining popularity every day. But also a lot of augmented reality stuff, prototypes, and things where you're launching a digital experience from a static asset, like packaging for a CPG company. Those sorts of things for the most part.
So I'm always interested in when we have agencies, big and small, to try and understand a little bit about kind of how much time and effort is taken up with voice-based projects, because I think it gives a good indication about the health of the industry. And for people listening to this, many people are either in the industry or trying to break into the industry. So it's always a good kind of like, almost like a benchmark to where, what's the state of play of things. And I was surprised when we had Rain Agency on earlier in the year. In fact, it might have even been last year, to be honest. And we asked how much, what proportion of work is spent on voice. And they said 100%. We're now a voice agency, basically. So I'm curious, with a big company like Vayner, and maybe it's not something you can answer for the whole of the entire company, but for your kind of side of things, for your kind of department, your division, what do you think the proportion of voice work versus other work is, do you think?
For our team specifically, I would say probably about 70-75% of our efforts are spent on voice. The other 25 maybe things like augmented reality or launching a digital experience from a static asset like a piece of packaging or an out-of-home ad or those kinds of things. But within that 75%, we're doing both production work, design work, and a lot of education and consulting, whether it's consulting about the where we see voice heading in terms of the design and the experiences, or just state of the space generally. So that's sort of how it breaks down.
And have you seen that change from the time that you joined to now? Are you working on voice more? Are you working on voice less? Or does it stay pretty constant?
That's a good question. I think in our team has always been pretty heavily focused on voice because it is the emerging channel of our day right now. However, I think over the 2.5 years that I've been here, there has been some shifting between production and education in both directions. So a lot of heavy production work in 2017, early 2018, then a bit of more education side of things where people are really trying to understand what is the state of the space, where is this heading, and now getting into a bunch of production work as well. And
I'm really interested as well in the fact that you
you mentioned that part of what you're doing is storytelling. And one of the things that I always say that I really want to see is I want to feel something through a voice, whether it's, heavy emotion or it's excitement or things like that. And storytelling has a big opportunity to do that. So do you feel like voice is a channel that can be, can drive emotion, can drive those types of feelings that you might get from a film or podcast or radio or things like that?
Absolutely. I don't think that we're there quite yet. I think that there are some examples of things going in that direction. But sound design on these channels is so early and is often pretty unconsidered. As developers, designers, even audience, our expectations are very early. And so particularly for developers and designers, we're just getting on the platform and figuring out what we can do, getting acquainted with this new technology. I think over the next year to 3 years, we'll see a lot more robust interaction design that incorporates sound. So audio feedback instead of verbal, which is a lot less cumbersome, will ultimately feel more natural, but also robust sound design of worlds for games or more narrative experiences. There are a couple of examples of like the Westworld skill did some more robust sound design. But I think that there's a ways to go.
Interesting. That I think that's one of my kind of passions is in the sort of sound design space. And we've spoke about sound design in the past with like Joel Beckerman and Eric C and stuff like that. And it's interesting. Going back to the kind of the concept of emotion, do you think? And when you said it's not quite there yet, is it the advancement of sound design practices that would bring about that, or is it the advancement or the kind of the maturing of storytelling on the medium?
I think it partially might be the investment that's required. Often when we're trying to prove out the reason for doing this stuff, it's all about creating an MVP and learning from it and getting on the platform. And I think that that's what's happened over the past year or two. Folks are just trying to get on the platform. But there's an investment that needs to be made in order to bring on the sound design talent and invest in those production capabilities that I think it just comes as less prioritized than the basic interactions.
You mentioned that it's a lot of POCs, and I think everyone in the industry probably is saying the same thing. But for Vayner specifically, is it really these companies coming to you and saying, hey, we want to try out voice, we want to see what this can do for our company? Or is it you going to them and saying, hey, for your company, we have this idea of how this new emerging technology, specifically voice, can contribute to your goals, and we want to give that a try?
I think it's really both. Probably more so the latter of folks coming and being interested in this new space and trying to understand where they fit within it. But we also have proactive ideas and see where we can provide value. So it sort of goes both directions.
What's your sort of, I kind of posted something on LinkedIn, and it's even on YouTube actually as well, a kind of like a whiteboard session where I was looking at the concept of agile delivery. So creating an MVP, launching it, getting on the platform, to use your words, and then iterating from there, versus a more kind of waterfall approach, which is rather than launching the MVP, do the iterating and get something fully ready and polished, things like sound design and all that kind of stuff, until you have something that is, up there with your likes of Westworld, and then go in with that. How are you sort of advising clients, or does it depend? Are you trying to push people to get on the platform, learn about it, get an MVP up there, or are you trying to encourage people to take a little bit more time, consider things a bit more, and try and go to market with something that's a little bit more kind of like production or like higher
That's
quality?
a really good question, and I think we probably operate in both ways, depending on the client, depending on the type of application. Obviously, if there's sort of a low risk of launching something and learning from it, or if there's a high return on launching something and getting it into the hands of real users and getting the feedback that you get in Amazon reviews and those sorts of places, we'll sort of weigh that cost benefit analysis. But we also do a lot of building of prototypes or building of an actual working application, and doing some user testing and desirability testing to see, is this a feature that people want? Should it work this way? How might people actually ask for these different features within the experience? And so it really all depends on what we're sort of going after. But I think it's a good point that in certain cases, there may be a reason to delay a launch and make the full investment into something more robust.
And changing topics a bit, the reason why we originally reached out to you, the reason why we said we have to have Claire on VUX World is you had given this great presentation at Voice Summit back in the summer about situational design. Can you tell us more about what that is, what situational design is?
Yeah, so situational design is really an approach to designing for voice that accounts for the user's context, and it ultimately comes down to setting up expectations for a user, what they could reasonably expect to do within this experience, and then accounting for all of the things that they might actually try to do. Right now, we sort of require that our audience conforms to the limited sort of tree-like structure of our experiences, and to talk a little bit more like a computer in ones and zeros, often asking yes or no questions or presenting a menu of 3 options and asking them to repeat back those options based on what they want to do. And this is a way to try and account for more conversational, fluid ways of designing an experience.
So what would an example be of situational design in practice, and like how would that differ from the tree-based design that you'd mentioned? Have you got kind of any examples or case studies of how it would work in practice?
Yeah, so in a tree-like structure, you would have the application say a menu of 2 or 3 different options, and account for the user to say which of those 3 options they'd like to proceed with, and they would go on that linear piece of the tree structure. In situational design, we make anything that is possible within the skill accessible from anywhere within the skill. So it's not about answering that one question in the moment, but allowing the user to tell you what they want to do and taking them there. So Paul Cutsinger and I gave a talk earlier this year at Voice Summit and used the example of a plant skill to illustrate. It was called the Plant Whisperer. And so in the Plant Whisperer example, if the Plant Whisperer is invoked and asks, it says, I can recommend plants, or provide care instructions, what can I help you with? The user might say something like, I want to know about a Monstera plant. The skill might respond, a Monstera plant likes indirect light. Are you interested in hearing more about this plant? And if the user says, I'll buy one, we can accommodate for that and allow the user to go into a purchase flow rather than forcing them to answer the question that was asked. And so rather than designing in a tree, we actually create a ton of different situations that account for all of the possibilities within the skill. And the user can sort of hopscotch between those based on what they tell us.
So you had, and in that presentation, you had kind of cards, didn't you? Like templated kind of cards that, does each card represent a situation? Is that how it works in terms of if you were going to go about actually designing it, you know, and putting something down that is a representation of it? Can you talk us through those templates, and maybe we can share the video that you have and stuff like that? But could you mind just talking us through what this template looks like and how you would go about actually documenting or designing this kind of
I'll sort of start with the high level architecture that we begin with, and this sort of comes from, you know, there's this idea of tell me if this gets too deep, but
this is all about getting deep. That's what we like.
Deeper the better. Yeah.
There's this idea of generalized artificial intelligence. We're pretty far away from that. What artificial intelligence is great at is doing very domain-specific tasks that are repetitive, and what our voice assistants are great at is delegating our tasks and routing them to the right specific capability. So within our skill designs, we can do the same thing. We have a skill that's called the plant whisperer, and within that skill, we have several domains of expertise. Our domains of expertise are really good at doing these very specific things. So in the plant whisperer, we might have one domain of expertise that's all about giving you plant information. Another domain of expertise might be all about helping you buy a plant. It's the purchase flow. And so within each of those domains of expertise, we now have our situations. And each situation is basically a set of characteristics about the context. And that could include anything that the designer wants to account for, from are they on a screen device or are they not on a screen device? Have they told us that they want to make a purchase, or are they just exploring? Have they told us what characteristics that they want in a plant? All of these things can be accounted for in this one situation, and we'll end up having, you know, many, many situations, depending on the depth of the skill. It could be 50 or 100. And that sounds very tedious, and it is actually quite tedious, but we're offloading that tedium from the user and making the experience better for them by taking it on ourselves. Another dimension that you might want to add to your situations, and probably will need to moving forward, is other types of devices. Are they on the go? Are they in the car? And these are things that we as designers should account for in order to give the best experience and the best response.
I can see that being really useful for users who know what they want to do or know what's possible. But what about those people who perhaps don't know what the skill can do? For example, with the plant whisperer, that they don't know that they can buy. They don't know exactly what's possible within the skill. What can you do for those users?
Well, the first piece is setting up expectations. So it comes through in perhaps a welcome message. And in this case, we can treat it just like you would a retail space. What happens when somebody enters your plant store? Well, you welcome them and say, I can help you find the perfect plant, or, you know, I can help you make a purchase. What is it that you want to do? But giving them that sort of context so that they know what they can reasonably expect to do. I can probably ask about what kinds of environments are right for a plant, or what plants are right for an apartment with no windows, because I've been given that context that's probably a reasonable thing to ask for. But there are places where for instance, designing a game, games are inherently rule-based. And so a user really needs to know exactly what they need to do next. But in a conversation, we don't need to be told from the person that we're speaking to at every turn what we need to say next in order to continue the conversation. And that's sort of where we're trying to get to in the situational design.
What's the... I can get how situational design is can be used for something if like, let's say in your example, someone's going from, you know, browsing and then rather than kind of getting through the funnel of browsing, like going from, like indoor plants down to like indoor plants that are either blue or pink, and then ones that only grow to like 3 foot, and filtering them down to a specific plant that's right for them. I can understand how during that process someone might just say, okay, yeah, we'll buy that, or actually tell me about the begonias or whatever, and then, like, so shifting away from one kind of dimension to another. There are there not places where you still might need the tree-based structure? For example, if someone does say buy it, then presumably there needs to be some degree of structure in order to get them through, which is essentially a purchase funnel. Is the philosophy that it's situational design across the board, or are you saying that it's broadly speaking the architecture is situational, but actually when you get to an intent you've identified, then you revert back to the kind of tree thing?
In some ways, it's a different way of documenting the design, and to allow for the flexibility of allowing users to jump from one place to another. But there are areas that could definitely be documented in a tree structure. It's just not as rigid.
So it's a design philosophy rather than an approach to actually how you would build it. Like, is there a difference in? And I don't know whether Dustin might kind of know this, but is there a difference in the way that you would actually technically build something out, or is it more a way of actually just designing and imagining what the interaction is?
That's a good question. I'm currently working with our developers basically to figure out the best way to document all aspects of the design to make their job easier. And I haven't asked if this has changed the way that they structure their code. So I'm not sure about that. Dustin, do you have any sense of?
I would imagine that there would be some difference, because if we think about it in a very rigid structure with guardrails, you know where someone's coming from, you know where someone's going to. And so you don't need to perhaps keep as much information about them throughout the life flow or consider what's going on. So Kane, for example, you and I are working on a project right now where we talked about, it's all about food ordering. And we said, okay, well, how often do we tell someone, here's all the things that you ordered, and here's the total of your order, and here's the delivery fee? Because what we were doing was we were telling them twice, I think 3 times, because they could jump around and we didn't necessarily know, okay, had they heard that before, had they heard it, or had they had not heard that. And so we had to keep a track of even, hey, have you kept track of, or rather, have you heard the total before? We have to keep track of that and not tell you again.
Absolutely. And that kind of information is accounted for in this way of documenting design. And from a user perspective, it probably should be, although it is quite tedious on the designer, and I'm sure the developer as well. But I think ultimately that's where we want our conversational assistants to be headed, to really know whether we've heard something before or not. I think the purchase flow is a really interesting one. And it's, I think, the most fun to design in this manner, because it really is just about keeping track of what have they told us and what have they not told us yet to fulfill this request.
What I really like about this, as you're describing it, is it seems about showing respect to the user, right? You're respecting the user because you're saying you're not an automaton.
Exactly.
You go where you want, but also it's showing a lot of respect because you talked about the tedium and the extra work on the designer and the developer. One of my favorite talks that I've ever, or it was an article representation of this talk, was talking about how when you're creating something, your time is, or rather the consumer's time is multiplied. So if we create a voice experience that takes off and 1 million people use it, and they have to add 30 extra seconds of time to get through that process, that's 30 seconds times 1 million. But if we think about, okay, well, we're going to take 3 extra days to build the situational design in. It's just being a good citizen to say, okay, well, I'll take that 3 days versus 30 seconds times a million. And so that's what I really like about this is you're showing respect. You're saying your time is valuable. You millions of people who are using my skill, or you're valuable. You know what you want to do, and we're going to build for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really exciting because we are collectively, all of the folks in the voice community are setting the precedent for what this technology will look like, what the experiences will sound like, for the next many years. And so as much as we can sort of encourage that they are designed more to conform to the way that humans speak versus expecting humans to conform to the way that the voice assistants currently speak is probably a good idea. There's a whole generation of folks that are growing up with these as kids and are really learning to speak to the Alexa and the Google Assistant and the other platforms in the way that is sort of rigid at the moment.
Mm. It's there was a story this week. Apparently, it was some kid's first word in December. Alexa. I'm pretty sure it's going to be my kid's first word. I keep keep getting him to try, and he does now. He knows what the smart speaker is, and he'll bend down. He'll go like that, and he'll shout. Yeah. He'll look at it. He'll bend towards it, and he'll shout. So he knows that he knows what it does, and he's only like 16-month-old.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, but what you were saying there, Dustin, in terms of like the net effect of not spending longer to do the hard work, and that's ultimately always kind of what the case is, even when building websites. To build a really simple website that works really intuitively for the user, usually it takes far longer to build because you need to manage all the complexity behind the scenes, and the net benefit of putting the effort in up front to save 30 seconds every time, accumulatively it's a better experience. But also, it's like I'm kind of a fan of trying to remove any element of friction or any barrier, because I kind of liken it to a bit like if you fill in like a website form or something like that, and it's asking you questions that you don't really need to be answering. On the first page, that's fine. On the second page, it's like, what's the point in this? On the third page, then there's a little bit of functionality that doesn't quite work. By the time you get to the end of it, you're like, you know what? It's just a nightmare. It's the same kind of thing in voice, isn't it? Where like if there's a little bit of friction, if things are taking longer than they need to, if the dialogues doesn't quite sound right, if you can't get from one situation to another, then the one incident in isolation doesn't seem like that much of a problem, certainly to a project team when you're reviewing something. But those issues accumulated over the course of an interaction, accumulated over a span of interactions over time, end up having a detriment to the whole experience.
Mm-hmm. Not only the experience, but the culture around these things.
100%. So the back to the kind of template, to document a situation, what kind of things are you looking for? What kind of considerations? You mentioned device type and stuff like that. Is there anything else that you would kind of document in order to design a situation?
So the primary things are what we know from the user and what we don't in order to fulfill some sort of request, whether that's purchase or recommendation or whatever it might be. And then the device type, multimodal screen versus headless is sort of the first place that we've incorporated. But then the context of the user could be the location geographically, if we wanted that dimension, or it could be, are they on the go? Are they wearing headphones? Can we reasonably expect that they are sort of multitasking? Driving is obviously a huge one. But it really can be any variable that's appropriate for your skill. Have they been here before? That's one that I think we're often used to accounting for, but there are so many more.
And is there any downsides to situational design?
I
challenges?
I'd say challenges are probably not necessarily specific to situational design, because they probably go from in no matter how you're communicating a design, but it's really about what is the best way that I can communicate this design to all of the stakeholders. I think we've found that situational design is a very clear way to communicate to our non-technical stakeholders, because you can actually have a conversation, a mock conversation, and jump from situation to situation to see if you've accommodated for all of the things that a user might ask for in user testing and that sort of thing. On the developer side, we've found it's been a more robust way of capturing some of the specifications that we want to capture. But some people are very used to seeing a tree flow type structure, and so that familiarity can be more convenient sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting. At Voice Summit was catching up with Paul Kutzinger not long after your presentation about situational design, and some developer came up to him and said, okay, situational design sounds great, but how do we work it into flow charts? Mm-hmm. And so it seems like people are definitely married to that way of representing the voice experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it really could fit in a flowchart. It would be just a very heavily annotated flowchart.
Yeah.
Like a lot of caveats.
A lot of buts.
Yeah, exactly.
So to wrap up on the situational design, and I know that we're getting on a little bit for time, but there's 5 principles. You've already mentioned one, which is to be adaptive. Can we flick through the 5 principles and you can give us a summary of each one?
Sure. So yeah, being adaptable is just allowing the conversation to shift based on a user's new request, even if it's not a direct answer to what was just asked previously, or to have, a fallback if they ask for something that you can't count for. Being personal is about using memory and storing certain information. So if they've been there before, welcoming them back, and that's something that we see pretty typically. But it can also remember that in the plant case, that they wanted plants that are pet friendly, and that's probably something that they're always going to want. So assuming after that first time that they do want something plant friendly could be a case. Being available, this is really about having the ability to have more deep indications, like should they have to go through the entire flow of the skill to make a purchase, or can they just go directly to the purchase flow if they know what they want? Being relatable is coming up with the right synonyms. So how do people actually talk? Do they have to say things in perfect English, or is there slang if there's sort of an audience that we're speaking to that might use more casual words? And then being multimodal is just accounting for the different devices. If they're potentially not looking at a screen, maybe they need a little bit more description. If they're looking at a screen, maybe they don't need so much of that verbal feedback. And for on the go, we'll start to think about how sound can be used to communicate things rather than verbal responses.
Something Siri should do, because the AirPods, I haven't got the brand new AirPods, I've got the ones before it, and whenever you ask for Siri, it doesn't make a noise at all. You've just got to guess whether or not it's activated and then speak and see what happens.
Yeah, we need that feedback.
Yeah.
I think that is actually such an interesting area, even communicating data. We have data visualizations. Why not have an audio version of that for certain applications? I know that Bloomberg is experimenting with sonification of stocks. Is it going down or is it going up? And you can easily imagine how that could be translated into sound. And that's something that we're super, super excited about thinking through. When is it appropriate to use sound design to communicate things rather than verbal?
So have you got any examples then of skills that are using sound well, skills that with good sound design?
Some of the first that come to mind are Westworld. That experience was incredibly immersive. Chompers is also a great one. They update their content on a continuous basis with great sound design and writing every single time. And then Wait Quiz, which we were fortunate enough to work with NPR on, has great writing, is highly interactive, and although it's a constrained flow because it's a game, there are open-ended questions that allow users to feel more engaged, and a lot of attention is paid to the sound design and the feedback of correct answers and those kinds of things. It was also just recognized by Amazon as one of the top 10 skills of 2019, which is really exciting. But the common thing about all of these is that they come from brands or organizations that are already quite experienced and invested in quality audio and visual production in some cases. But I think the success of these experiences can potentially be an indicator for other brands and other folks that great sound design and investment in great writing is worthwhile and shouldn't just be considered an afterthought, but part of the design process in the beginning.
And the Wait quiz, was that kind of like end-to-end designed in terms of, using recorded voice actors and things like that, or is it more kind of like using text-to-speech with some SSML and then some sound effects and stuff like that?
It's all recorded VO, and it's the hosts of the actual radio quiz show that are updating content every week, and they're just so fun and funny, and so the content is really rich.
And do you think that for companies that are not kind of like traditionally kind of like skilled in audio production or resourced for audio production, obviously NPR, that's essentially its whole business is audio production, and then Westworld, that was from HBO, so they're well and truly versed. I think Xandro are even involved in that as well, and they're quite like quite heavy on the kind of audio production in terms of their experience and stuff. So do you think it's a requirement for companies to have that kind of pedigree, or will they need to bring in that kind of pedigree, or is this something that you think that people can kind of learn and improve at?
I think there are probably a couple ways of going about it. I don't think that every company is going to need to create their own internal audio production company right away. There are probably baby steps, but the point is really that consideration for audio content and sound design is just something that can be considered upfront and not something that is applied at the end, which is sort of how it sometimes can be set up. But coming back to what will sort of make better voice experiences moving forward, I think it is just that consideration for sound design, not only in immersive storytelling experiences, but considered audio cues, and that can just be a little sound effect. And you can look at free libraries of sounds or sort of low effort ways of introducing some of those pieces, but finding a balance between the verbal and non-verbal feedback that orients the user in whatever the skill is, whether it's an entertainment or something that's more utilitarian. And then the other piece is just more contextual, flexible structures with sort of modular interactions that allow users to drive the conversation rather than conforming to these narrow sets of predefined paths that we sometimes see, and accounting for the context of the user. And that's what situational design is trying to get to.
There was an interesting study by Audio UX. We've had them on the podcast. We've had Eric C. on the podcast. This was before the study, though, and he was referencing the concept of audio as an afterthought, or the 5 A's or 4 A's, I think he called it. And in their study, they found that the use of premium sounding earcons that are consistent throughout the skill. So for example, if you have a sound that is a success noise and then a sound that is like a failure sound, having those easily recognizable as part of the same family of sounds, so to speak, can improve the engagement of skills, and also it increases the perceived premium kind of quality by X%. I can't remember what it was, 30 odd percent or something like that. So they've kind of like proven that a holistic sounding suite of earcons does measurably improve the user experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm familiar with some of their work, and I really love the way that they're thinking about this side of things, because I think if done right, it absolutely can make an impact. And from the user's perspective, it's almost so subtle that if it's successful, it disappears and just conveys this bit of information that helps you along the way.
It reminds me a little bit. In fact, I think it was probably this time last year. I think we had Rebecca Evanhoe on the show. She was at Mobiquity at the time and then moved to Amazon, where she's at now. And she was talking about, I can't remember the specific part of the conversation, but we ended up at the point of kind of comparing voice to other kind of modalities, and the kind of age-old saying of like good design goes unnoticed. So it's like, you know, all of the hard work that goes into making something really, really seamless, it doesn't need to be an obvious good kind of design. It just needs to work and do its job. And that's almost where kind of sound design fits as well. You don't want it to be like blatantly obvious. You just want it to be natural sounding and make the whole thing a better holistic kind of experience.
Totally. And, you know, I think one of the challenges for designers, and I don't have an answer for this in solving this, but when we design for visual interfaces, we work with the fundamental element of a pixel. For video editors, maybe they're working with storyboards or working with video directly, but it's the frame that's sort of the fundamental element. And when we're designing for audio first experiences through voice user interfaces, we're starting with not an audio unit, but a script or something that's a little bit disconnected. So there's an inherent disconnect, I think, or a need to apply sound later. So I think that there's something to be solved there. How can we work at the beginning with audio considerations rather than applying that later?
There's this. If people haven't checked this out, then you should check it out. It's the podcast we did with Joel Beckerman of Man Made Music, and one of the things that he said that stuck with me ever since, it kind of taps into what you're saying there, which is around, he talks about scoring experiences from moment to moment to moment, as in like in a passage of time, every single second matters. And it's kind of like, how are you telling and conveying either a story or an emotion or whatever it is that you're trying to get across in every single second. So it's almost as if, like, I don't know whether you'd agree with this analogy, but your analogy of looking at designers fundamentally working with pixels and videographers fundamentally working with frames, it's almost as if conversation designers or sound designers, when you're creating voice experiences, the fundamental kind of like part of it is almost like the passage of time almost.
I think that's beautiful and poetic. It makes me want to take a couple of classes in sound theory.
Yeah,
and then changing topics a bit, Claire, you've got a pretty unique background and you've got an interesting vantage point as well to examine and think about what's happening in the near future. So in your mind, with voice and with conversational, what should we be expecting over the, let's say, next year? This is a good time to make our predictions.
Over the next year, I'll have to double down on sound design. I've mentioned it a couple of times before, but I think more robust sound design and creating more immersive experiences, but also thinking about interaction designers and sound designers coming together in one sort of body to make our experiences more interesting and more enjoyable. And then the other area, I don't think this is over the next year, but over the next 5 years, I think we might stop speaking about voice applications as specific to voice, because we'll have all of these different ways of interacting with our experiences. And it might be using our voice if we're multitasking or need to be hands-free, but we'll be able to use that same application by typing in our phone or using a gesture, perhaps. And so I think all of these things will start to be considered, and we'll have multiple ways of interacting with our digital information.
Do you think that devices are converging? I don't know if I've actually published this, but I've got it in my, if I haven't already, it's in my pad to make some kind of article about it. But I was thinking the other day that essentially once you've got voice as an interface, there's no difference between the Echo Show in your kitchen, the Samsung TV in your front room, and the Android phone in your hand. They've all got screens. They'll all enable you to interact with them in whichever way is most convenient. You know, sometimes you'll have headphones in, sometimes you'll have a headless device, but ultimately the kind of things that you will be able to do on these devices is probably kind of similar over time. So is that a fair assumption that devices are just converging into this?
Ultimately, it's about ambient computing, and what form that takes physically, I think is yet to be seen. It might just be that we always have our headphones on and we can interact with any device or environment based on our phone and our headphones. Or it could be, many other ways that this comes together. But it's ambient computing where we can just interact with what we need to without much, with a lot of ease.
I think that's an interesting question. I'm not sure. And Claire, I think it's interesting that you bring up ambient computing, because I remember in the early 2000s that there was that first promise of it. It all seemed very light-based for some reason. There were all those devices that would light up different colors based on stocks going up or down, or the weather being hotter or colder. But certainly with the price of computing decreasing, and certainly internet increasing, and 5G around the corner, if that's actually going to be a game changer or not, you open up the possibility of so many more things being connected and being able to get that information as well. It's going to be interesting to see whether it happens or not. It's definitely going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, I wish that I had the foresight of seeing our time right now in retrospect, because I've been actually doing a lot of reading about sound design and the origins of audio recording. And it's so interesting. At the time when audio recording technologies were coming about, there was a lot of preservation technology and preservation discussion, including embalming, which was happening at around the same time, and preservation of canned foods. And so folks were talking about recording voices as preserving the voices of the dead, because for the first time we would be able to hear people's voices after they were gone. And it sounds so strange, and it's such a weird thing to look at how the culture around audio recording was at that moment. So I'm trying to think about, like, how will we see today in 20, 50 years, and the conversations that we're having about this new technology and how it impacts the culture. So
it's interesting, because it's almost like similar conversations seemingly then are happening, because, it's like when we had James Vlahos on the podcast, he created did he call it Dadbot, Dustin? Can you remember?
I don't remember, but he's launched a company since then to actually do this for other people as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, there you go then. So essentially, if you haven't seen it, Claire, and everyone listening, check out the James Vlahos episode for more details. But essentially what he did is he interviewed his dad before he died, and asked him all the kinds of questions that he would want to know, and then essentially put all of the answers into a bot, so that then after that he can have a conversation with his dad once he'd passed on. Yeah. So now
That's incredible.
So he's doing that. His company does that, does it, for other people?
Yeah. He's launched it recently. Seems to be doing pretty well with it.
That's fascinating.
Wow. So that seems, they were having the same conversations with the birth of audio recording, but now we can have it interactive.
Very, very interesting. Full circle.
Claire, well, I think this is extremely fascinating. Kane, any other questions on your end?
I don't think so. What books? One more question. What books are you reading on sound design and the origins of sound?
Well, the one that I was just mentioning is the chapter is called A Resonant Tomb. It's in a book called The Audible Past. I can't remember the author's name. I'll have to send it to you after. But it's a really, really interesting, very, very, very theoretical and philosophical look at sound. It's pretty awesome.
Sounds right up my Straza. I'll put the link. I'll find that. I'll put the link in the show notes as well if anyone wants to check it out.
Awesome.
Yeah, and finally, one thing that's always interesting to hear is, what do you want to see in regards to voice? People who are listening who can build things based on situational design, what would you like to see? What would you like to use on voice in the next year?
I think I'd just really like to see some really interesting experimentation. We have there's some parallels with the early days of web design, and things are a little bit clunky. And now there's some really, really incredible, from WebGL, 3JS, all of this really, really interesting, robust, immersive experiences that you can have. And I think we need to push what's possible on our voice platforms a little bit more. And that just requires getting acquainted with it, which we're sort of in the stages of doing now. And now I think it's time for more experimentation with pushing the creativity of these platforms.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. One of the things that I loved being on the early internet is it was really weird. Yeah. Like so much of it was just really weird. And I'd love to see some of that come into voice as well.
Totally. Me too.
Perfect. So Claire, where can people find you? Where can people find Vayner? Where can people find out more information about situational design?
Yeah, best place is LinkedIn is always a good one. So feel free to reach out. And situational design, there's a lot of great documentation from the Amazon Alexa team. And, I'm always happy to chat with folks as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Claire, for appearing. This has really just been fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
That was Claire Mitchell of VaynerMedia. Thank you, Claire, for joining us. That was a really good conversation. That the situational design side of things I'm really interested in, because I do know from speaking to another few people that it's actually pretty difficult to create, to develop stuff using situational design. But the principles are absolutely sound, allowing a user to get to any part of the skill, any part of the application, any functionality or features from wherever they are at any point in time makes total sense. I do think that tree-based structures are still relevant for certain parts. For example, when you get into a purchase funnel, you probably want to guide a user through that rather than let them say anything they want and hop out of that. So I think that tree-based structures probably work well for certain domains, but the principle of allowing a user to say anything at any time to access various bits of functionality depending on what their needs are makes absolute sense. And I'm so glad that somebody else shares the same passion as I do for sound design. I still really do think I'm going to keep banging the drum for sound design, because I do think it's one of the most underutilized yet one of the most important parts of any voice application is sound design, because it's an audio medium, it's audio first, and there is so much that you can achieve with doing sound design. So thank you, Claire, for banging the drum as well, and some great examples of some skills that use good sound design as well, which you should totally check out. So thank you, Claire. That was an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Dustin, as always. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for listening. Until next time, see you later.